From the earliest ages, man has been able to originate fire, but he has yet to find an effective method of preventing its undisciplined presence, which ultimately results in needless economic waste of life and property that affects directly or indirectly every citizen of the community. Let us use our city as an example. From May 1955 to March 1956, a series of 9 fires put the heat on Milwaukee. When the Moose Club at 768 North Jefferson Street ignited, hungry flames soon enveloped the entire building, driving the occupants to safety, but the firemen to added perils. As forced onto adjacent rooftops, unable to continue their battle from within, they were required to rely upon external operations as their major effort in controlling the blaze. To reinforce this effort, they quickly converted their aerial ladders into water towers and directed the additional hose lines toward the great cloud of smoke hovering menacingly over the area. As the firemen gravely battle for control and the worried personnel discuss their impending loss, the fire roars on. To diminish at will, leaving a gutted shell as a grim reminder of its destructive supremacy. The fire which menaced the Republican Hotel in downtown Milwaukee introduced an additional hazard to the routine of the firemen's duties. Not only must they brave the building to probe for the source and extent of the blaze, they must too check that all occupants have reached safety. Assured that every precaution has been to preserve, they are free to concentrate their efforts on the task of subduing the evident fire and investigating for hidden areas of danger. A large percentage of the 10,000 annual fatalities from fire results from the effects of smoke, superheated air, and gases produced by the blaze, as distinguished from deaths due to external burns. In many instances, inhaling briefly of these hot and/or toxic gases can prove fatal. And very often, the fire producing them may be on a floor several stories below the victim, or as in this situation, located within the walls of the structure, in which case grave material damage will result as well, not as direct result of the flames and smoke, but more indirectly as a result of the firemen's desperate attempts to locate the insidious source. Thus it can be seen that any fire, large or small, may prove very costly. Fire cares little whether it claims as its spoils an empty warehouse or an aged, overcrowded tenement house on Market Street. And when it happens to be the latter, as on this evening, the task of the fire department becomes a heartbreaking as well as a difficult one. For though every possible piece of rescue equipment needed was on the scene, and the skill of each fireman was tapped to the utmost, 6 persons perished and 13 were injured before the inferno quieted. Life nets, used for the first time in 18 years, saved 3 residents, those that could be convinced to use them. For others more fortunate, the fire escape was a grim but convenient path to safety. And then there were 4 children, a young woman, and an elderly man who cared not that they were carried out of the building in protective arms of firemen. The aerial extension ladders erected to the upper story windows provided a means of evacuation unappreciated by the trapped residents. Injured or crazed by fear, the victims were dependent upon the sympathetic yet insistent aid of the firemen to reach the ground in safety. The night was indeed one of waste and horror, but there remains a bitter lesson to be learned from it. Don't wait till it's too late to study it. Tons of water were poured into the Mertz department store on Milwaukee's north side in an heroic effort to save the building and its merchandise. But ironically, the very merchandise itself hampered firefighting efforts, giving easy access to the structure. Thus, the day resulted in many thousands of dollars worth of damage, the material portion of which will no doubt be compensated by insurance. But the destruction of property is not the only loss incurred by a fire. Losses for which no insurance can reimburse the owner, such as intangibles on which no monetary value can be placed, security represented by a thriving source of income, or the life of the janitor fatally overcome by smoke. These are the factors that tortures one's mind when all is over. And nothing remains to be done save for the department to sweep out the gutted structure and clean up the burned debris. Yes, these are the factors that are real, and unless we are willing to face them squarely and in time, we are apt to learn the hard way their true values. Fire doesn't care when or where it strikes. It just indiscriminately destroys. And to you or me, it usually comes no closer than a headline in the morning paper. But without due caution on our behalf, we are apt to awaken to find a familiar name in the body of that article, as did the members of this Bayview residence. They didn't regard as significant an inadequately insulated stovepipe until it demolished their home. It was only as they reviewed the rubble that remained of their possessions that they recalled the fire prevention warnings. We might do well to learn from the tragic misfortunes of others. Negligence is an expensive commodity, and sooner or later, it will collect its price. Due to the all-too-human tendency to put what you don't need out of sight, overcrowded, poorly ventilated basements are the source of an amazingly large percentage of home fires. Immunity to this hazard does not come with living in an apartment, for the occupants of this 27th Street apartment house can testify to the fact that one small, cluttered locker is sufficient germ for the ignition of a costly blaze, and one which would prove extremely difficult to master under the most ideal circumstances. But when a brisk lake breeze whips the night into a frenzy of snow and ice, and excessive smoke makes procedures within the structure impossible, the task becomes nearly inhuman. Again, the fire rescue squad was on the scene. However, not as a protective measure for injured occupants, as all the tenants were evacuated safely, but rather to administer emergency treatment to firemen overcome by smoke inhalation. For though protective equipment was worn by all attempting to enter the burning building, in many instances the masks proved insufficient to cope with the smoke and fumes that penetrated the area, and the administration of oxygen was required to revive the defeated challengers. But the battle continued into the night, lacing the wintry street with an intricate pattern of hose lines. A battle prompted by a basement too convenient by far for junk. Raging out of control for 12 hours, the Peerless Plastics factory provided Milwaukee with its most spectacular fire in years. The property damage totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. The loss incurred by the stoppage of production was equally disastrous. And yet, the fire can be said to be a relatively cheap one, for all personnel employed at the time of the explosion escaped without injury. This can be attributed to the recognition on the part of management that hazards do exist and that it is true economy to spend money to provide adequate protective facilities and to indoctrinate employees with a proper code of procedure to be practiced in the event of an emergency. Had the evacuation not been as immediate, this would truly have been a disaster in every sense of the word, for the building became a raging inferno in a matter of minutes. Utility companies were called upon to assist in cutting power lines so as to eliminate the potential danger of electrical shock, a danger which was intensified by the presence of such a vast quantity of unharnessed water. Due to the extreme flammability of the chemicals present, explosion upon explosion showered the area with hot cinders, forcing the fire department to concentrate its efforts upon the preservation of adjacent buildings. Such a holocaust as this does not affect Peerless employees only. Ultimately, it affects everyone in the community, inasmuch as the vast monetary loss endured substantially increases the overall insurance risk for the city. So take heed when working with chemicals